Hello and welcome to another video from the only channel that you need to not only survive the current apocalypse, but actually enjoy it. And we're out in my greenhouse today, something I rarely do. Mostly because I don't use my greenhouse for growing food. It's stupid for somebody like me to do that, because if you've got something in a greenhouse, it's going to be in a pot. A plant that's in a pot has to be maintained. You got to water it every day. You got to make sure it gets nutrients, it doesn't get too hot. And all you got to do is forget one or two times and it's over with. So primarily, I use a greenhouse just for making new plants that I'm going to plant in the yard, not for actually planting things in here that I plan on growing in here. That's called propagating, and we do that through seeds, cuttings, and shoots. Those are the three ways to propagate a tree. And so today I'm going to be doing some loquats. Loquats are also known as Japanese plums. And they're always grown from seeds. I don't know of anybody that grafts them or gets cuttings from them, because I really don't think that they do well with that. And seeds seems to be a really good deal with loquats. Like with a lot of trees like apples, they pollinate apples with crab apples, which means that 99% of everything that grows from an apple seed is going to be a crab apple. That's a hard little round sour thing that has very limited uses. But with loquats, no matter what you do, every loquat tree produces edible fruit. And I have never bitten into a loquat that didn't taste good. They're always juicy. They're always a little bit sour, a little bit sweet. Some are more sour, some are more sweet, but they're all delicious. So we're not going to lose by planting seeds. If we plant 50 and 50 come up, they'll produce 50 trees with edible fruit. Now, I normally am not going to be taking seeds out of loquats like this. Normally, the way that I'll take a seed out of a loquat is to eat it and then spit the seed into my hand or into a pot like we have here in the sink. But this is a little bit different. What happened was my friend Judy planted a tree in one of her neighbor's yards as a gift. He said he liked her loquat tree, so she brought him a loquat tree and planted it. And, you know, they're just like everybody else. You know, around here, fruit never hits the ground. Same thing at Judy's house. There's not a single thing that she ever throws away. She picks everything when it's ripe. She'll either eat it herself or bring it to market. But most people, you know, they're just happy to look out and see their tree has fruit and occasionally reach up and grab one when they're out there doing something. And so the tree just went unpicked. Well, eventually, my friend Judy was talking to her neighbor, and he invited her over to pick the fruit. So she went over there and picked the fruit, but by then, a lot of the fruit was already going bad. So the stuff that she could take to market wasn't everything. It was just only a certain percentage that was good enough to sell or to eat. But this tree had the biggest loquats that we have ever seen out there just growing on a tree. Now, that doesn't mean that planting these is going to produce large loquats. Here's one I found earlier. See, they're all kind of already rotten. But that is big. For a loquat, that's big. And here's my reasoning on it. When you get a fruit off of a tree, that fruit is not a product of just that tree. You don't know what pollinated it. So you've got the male flower, the female flower could be from different trees. And in fact, the tree that pollinated that may have been one of Judy's trees that has very, very small fruit. So you don't know what you're going to get. But we feel that if a tree has really, really large fruit, you know at least what half of the genetics of that tree is. So it's just a good idea that we've got these. We're going to go ahead and take the seeds out. And I guess I should have shown that to you. We'll see. I'll show you in a second. Okay, here's a kind of a regular looking one. In fact, even though it's in there with all that rotten fruit, I'm going to go ahead and eat it. This seed has already got the germ coming out of it. And they'll do that a lot of times. And a lot of these, since they're rotting inside this box here, there's a very good possibility that a lot of them are going to be sprouting. Now, you can eat the skin, I guess, but you know, what's the point? It doesn't taste good. So we're going to throw that in this is my compost bucket. And and I will compost them. But first thing I'll do is I'll throw 2 or 3 out in the yard, see if the chickens will eat them. If the chickens like them, then I'll just throw them all to the chickens. But if they seem to not care about them, we'll just take them out to the compost bucket. And here's what is the inside. And so that one has, the seed that's in here is not viable. It's just too tiny. So we'll throw the whole thing in there. Here's another. Yeah, let's see, I guess you can see those. Put the seeds in our bucket. And this is the bucket that I'm using. And we're just going to go ahead and throw all the seeds in here. I really should be using a wash tub, but my wash tubs are all metal. And I've done that before. And by the time you get all the stuff out of there, you got rust, serious rust. So the only thing I have that's plastic is that's big enough. And so that's what we're going to be doing. Yeah, a lot of these don't even have viable seeds, just teeny tiny little throwaways. I'm going to throw one to these chickens and see what they do with it. Shoot, them are some full chickens. They just looking at me. I have to see where I threw that so I can check to see if it's still there when I get done. A couple of big seeds. And it's always best to start, if you're going to just start one because you got a very small yard or whatever, start a really big seed, not because it'll produce a big fruit, but because it has a lot more energy in it. The smaller seeds, they got to get up to sun quick so they can get energy from the sun. But the ones with really large seeds they'll grow and grow and grow when there is no sun until they run out of energy from the seed itself. Because it's really the only thing that's going to make the seed bigger is the fat or the food for the baby plant that comes out of it. Now we're putting way too many of these things in this bucket, which means they're going to be hard to pull apart. But the dirt that I got in here, which is basically just dirt, is very loose. So when these things get to where they look like they're worth transplanting, we're just going to grab them by the top and pull them out. They're not going to get damaged. And we'll put them in individual pots until they get big enough to take into the woods. I wasn't even going to bother with this greenhouse again because you can, I can go out and buy a full-size tree for $30. It ain't worth my time to come out here and do all this work for $30. But I've cleared a large enough area in the woods that we're not talking about $30 anymore. We're talking about thousands of dollars, because it's going to take probably at least another 100 trees to fill the spaces up that I have created with my clearing efforts. And a lot of that's just from thinning. I've always said you don't thin everything out of your woods, because if you do that, you get too much light, and with too much light comes rapid growth on your ground covers. And my ground covers are they're aggressive. They're like grapevines and stuff that will take over the forest and choke your trees and make it impossible, or at least difficult, to walk through the forest. Which I don't like. I like to be able to go out there naked and barefoot. I tell you what, a bunch of sticker vines don't make that easy. But I've cleared out enough that we're getting a whole lot more light to the ground than what we need for what's out there. But I think if I can get a few trees out there to take advantage of that light, that they'll grow quickly and keep light from getting to the ground cover. But even the trees I got will do that. I've got so many big trees that are kind of getting really thick now because of my thinning. When you thin a forest, it struggles to replace that shade that it had before. And so trees that were growing really, really slow will suddenly start to grow really, really quick. And I suspect by midsummer we'll be back to having very little light hitting the ground out there. You want the canopy trees to absorb a lot of the light, but to let enough light go through to feed your understory. And you want the understory to get a lot of light, but just enough to let enough light through to feed your ground covers in a sustainable fashion. You know, it's not that you want your ground cover to have full sunlight, but you do want it to have enough light to be healthy. Loquats are also known as Japanese plums, and this is what the tree looks like. Here's a close-up view of a cluster of loquats, and this is what loquats look like when they come out of a can. In America, you're not going to normally find these on your grocer's shelves. You may find them on a shelf of an Asian market or Chinese grocery store. One place you may have seen them is in a Chinese restaurant on the buffet. These are orange, but sometimes they can be white. If you see white ones on a Chinese buffet, they may be Japanese plums and they may not. These are called longan, rambutan, and lychee. Although they all look pretty much the same and taste pretty much the same when they come out of a can, in real life, when they're on the tree, they don't look anything alike, and there is a distinct difference in the flavors. This is what a longan tree looks like, and this is what the fruit looks like. This one is rambutan, and as you can see, it doesn't look anything like the other three, and here's the fruit. And this is lychee tree, and this is lychee fruit. Sometimes even loquats don't quite look like loquats. These were picked in Spain, so if anybody happens to be passing through Spain during the loquat season and you're thinking about coming by my house, please pick a few of these, eat them, and save me the seeds. But please, don't bother bringing me any seeds that you purchased online. I have searched the web diligently and have determined that everyone selling giant loquat seeds currently is a scam artist. First off, there is only a 50% chance that the seeds would ever grow giant loquats in the first place. But secondly, if you look at most of these so-called rare seed vendors, their inventories are almost all seeds of varieties which physically cannot be grown from seed. So stay away from them. They are all scam artists. In the United States, loquats are hardy all the way up to zone 8, which means that they'll grow in 8, 9, 10, or 11. And on this map, and the reason I like this particular map is because the red on this map is zone 7. So it's pretty much pointless to grow anything in the red zone or anything north of the red zone. However, south of the red zone, you should be able to grow loquats with no problem. And in fact, you may be able to grow them all across the United States. The only problem you're going to have with growing them north of the red zone is that you probably will never get any fruit. I've never seen a loquat tree damaged by frost, but if you have a late frost, chances are you're going to either lose the flowers or you're going to lose the fruit. Where I live is zone 9A, and we only get loquats about 2 times out of every 3 years. So 1 out of 3 years the fruit will be lost due to a late frost. As far as longan, lychee, and rambutan go, they will not even grow where I live. You have to be in just a very small portion of California, the southern tip of Texas, perhaps right down by the mouth of the Mississippi River in Louisiana, and down at the very southern tip of Florida in order to grow longan, lychee, or rambutan. Now we'll take a look at some of the loquat trees I have growing out here on my property. Now I like to have variety. I like every single tree to be different from every other tree. But with loquats, they just do so good and they're so easy to grow. I mean, I don't have to water them, fertilize them, prune them, or anything. And they'll grow from a seed, which is very rare. There's very few trees that you can just stick a seed in the ground and get a viable tree that will produce fruit every time. But in my area, there are only 3 varieties of fruit that can be grown from seed and be depended on to reach maturity and produce an edible fruit. And those 3 are loquats, peaches, and citrus. With loquats and peaches, I know that every single tree will produce a similar fruit. Loquats will always produce loquats, and my peaches will always produce my peaches. I can't grow peaches from seeds grown elsewhere, but as long as the seeds come from my peach tree, they will always reach maturity and always produce an edible fruit similar to the other edible peaches on my property. With citrus, there are two distinctions making them less desirable to grow from seeds. One is that if I put the seeds directly into the ground and we get a hard freeze, they'll die. That's not true of peaches and loquats. Another distinction is that when I put a citrus seed in the ground, I am not guaranteed that I'm going to get the same variety of fruit. In other words, I can plant a seed taken from an orange and get something that is more like a lemon or a grapefruit. If you get a seed, a citrus seed from the store, chances are whatever you get is what it's going to grow, because those fruits are grown in orchards that have tens of thousands of the same exact variety of trees. So the chances are your tree was pollinated by a clone of the same tree. Chances are you're going to get whatever that fruit is. In an area like where I live, if I save a seed out of one of my fruits, there's really no telling what pollinated it. There's no telling what I'm going to get. That's okay. I love lemons. I love oranges. I love grapefruits. I love satsumas. I love tangerines. I love everything that's citrus. If you grow one of these things in a lawn, in general, they're going to be really short and fat. It'll be easy to get the fruit off of. But I planted this one out here in the woods, and when I planted it, it was surrounded by other trees, so it had to grow straight up in order to get light. Now that I've cut the other trees away, I've got this really tall, skinny loquat, and I can't get the fruit off of it. In general, at least I won't be able to once it reaches maturity. Right now, since it is so long and skinny, all I have to do is pull it down and pick the fruit off of the tree once I get it down, and it's just simply let it back up after I get finished picking the fruit. But by the time this thing becomes a problem and I can't get the fruit, it's not that big of a deal, because I've got about 25 of these things currently, and I expect that in the next couple of years I'll have 100 of them. Okay, it's been about a month since we planted all of our loquat seeds in that pot, so we're going to take a look at that pot and see just how much progress we've had since we stuck those seeds in the dirt. As you can probably see, a few of them have got nice big green leaves on them. Some of them have very small leaves, and that may be all you can see because the dirt is basically the same color as the tree. But there's about 50 little sprouts in here, and I'll try to show that to you by putting this card behind them. You could probably, if you can't see the sprouts, you can see the shadows, but that's the way this whole bucket is just filled with these little loquat trees. Now, this is way too many in here, and it's going to be hard to get them apart. You can't just grab them and pull them out. At least you can't do that right now. I may be able to do that a little later when they're a little bit bigger, but if not, I'm going to end up having to go in and grab the whole thing and take it out as one piece and then slowly work them apart. It's going to be a very intense hour or two while I transplant these things into individual pots. And if they're large enough, we'll actually take them out into the ground and transplant them directly into the ground. Now, the only thing that I would have to do in order to transplant directly into the ground is to go out there with my mower and mow everything down first, so that these plants end up being the tallest thing in the ground. And they would have to be big enough for me to put one of them little red vinyl ribbons on them, so that I won't step on them or run over them with the mower 6 months later when I go out there and mow again. Now, here's a photograph of a compost pile from about 1.5 years, 2 years ago that has 2 loquats growing in it. There are other trees in there. It looks like a couple of water oaks, but I had video of me separating these 2 loquats in order to move the bigger one to another location, and somehow I lost it, which seems to be a common theme here at the Sustenance and Covering Worldwide headquarters. But it did save the video of me planting this. So we'll take a look at that right now. Alright, we're going to go ahead and dig us a hole with this Hody Hody. That's the same tool I used when I was separating two Loquat trees. And I always just try to dig a hole the exact size of the dirt that's around the plant. That way I can just stick it in the ground and kind of pack it in there. In fact, it's a good idea once you plant a tree and you go through about a month of watering it to come back and step on it with your feet all the way around, because a lot of times the rain will wash out big empty spaces that'll end up putting some of the roots suspended between the tree and the dirt, and then your tree will die, because once those roots dry out, the whole plant is going to dry out. But anyway, this is there's really no special way to plant trees. When you get a tree, it always has all kinds of detailed instructions. Basically, all you got to do is get the tree out of the pot and put it into the ground and make sure that there isn't any air around it. I like to mark it with a couple of these little red flags, because there's so much stuff growing out here, it's really easy to not remember where you are and just run right over something like this. Here is the Loquat that we just moved in its new location. It's been here for about 24 hours. If you notice, the leaf is flopping up. That's a pretty good indication of stress, but that's okay. You can't really move a plant without stressing it out a little bit. But immediately after planting this, you need to go ahead and water, and then you need to water about once a day for a week. Once a week for a month, and then once a month until the plant goes into dormancy in the winter. And so that rule applies if you plant the thing in the spring or if you plant it in the fall. You just need to keep it moist until the sap goes down into the roots. Here we are 30 days later, and this isn't the plant that we transplanted. This is actually the location where we transplanted that tree from. And the reason I'm showing it to you is because I did have to do a little bit of damage to the roots of this tree when I was moving the other tree. Looking at the other tree now, we can see that it's still very green and very shiny. The leaf is still hanging a little bit, but the tree is okay, and it seems to be on its way to being a healthy, fruit-producing tree. Loquats are a tropical fruit, and the United States is not in the tropics, but part of the United States is in the tropics. And although it is a very small part, the vast majority of people who live in this country live along the coastline, and a whole lot of the coastline is tropical. So by default, a large portion of the U.S. population lives in areas where loquats can be grown. And if you've only got a very small piece of land and you can only grow a couple of trees, loquats may not be one of them. But if you live where I live, loquats would be one of them. You need to grow whatever will be the most productive for your part of the country. But if you have a very large piece of land, then you should attempt to grow loquats if you live anywhere near the tropics, because even if you live in an area that's too cold to produce fruit on a loquat tree, it doesn't mean that you can't enjoy the appearance of a loquat tree, because they are very beautiful. And who knows, you may have an odd year when you can produce loquats even though you live way too far north for that to be a normal occurrence. Now, even though you're only going to get your loquat crop over the course of about a month, you can eat loquats year long. You can't get them in the store, but if you're growing them, you can dry them. I highly recommend that if you know where you can purchase one of these, that you go out and purchase one. They're very cheap. I think I only paid like 20 bucks for this one. It's an absolute work of art. Doesn't take much to store it. You just put a nail in the wall and hang it up and use it for decoration for the 346 days a year when you're not using it. But when you are using it, it makes it very convenient to be able to load your basket up with a whole bunch of very thinly sliced fruit. Put it out on the roof of your car, and if it looks like rain, you bring it in and you set it on your bed under the ceiling fan. It'll dry in your house just as easy as it'll dry out in the yard. Now, how you're going to dry loquats is simply cut them in half, take the seeds out, and lay them skin down on this basket. Another YouTube channel called Eat the Weeds has a video just about drying, or just about loquats, that includes instructions for drying them with actual footage of them being dried. I'm not going to slice a loquat in half to show you how to slice a loquat in half. I got a feeling you can figure that out. But in any case, once you dry them, you can store them and you can eat on them all year long if you have enough loquats to do that. Oh well, we'll see you next time, and as always, if you don't want to survive, don't listen to me.